Hey there, and welcome to another episode of WVU Energy Express on West Virginia Public Broadcasting and YouTube. I'm your host, Zach Harold. This week, we're going to visit with a few friends from down at WVU's Jackson's Mill. We're going to start with our friend Joe, who's going to talk to us all about the rich history surrounding the mill.
Hello everyone, my name is Joe Obidzinski and I'm the historian here at WVU Jackson's Mill. So as we talk about Jackson's Mill as the first state 4-H camp in the nation, it's important to talk about how it came to be and how it developed. So what we have to do is we have to go back a little ways into the early part of the 20th century, all the way back to 1915. In 1915, the first 4-H camp was held here in West Virginia at Camp Good Luck in Randolph County. This became quite a popular idea, and more camps were held, and there was a decision made that we needed to find a place where kids from all across West Virginia could come and have 4-H camp. But why was it Jackson's Mill? This site, although the Jacksons no longer owned it by the turn of the 20th century, or by 1900, it still was a place that was popular and that people were coming to. The problem was that all of that land that the Jacksons had once had been sold and parceled off, and all that really remained of Jackson's Mill was about 5 or 6 acres, what is now our historic area. People in the local community, the local town of Weston here in Lewis County, were kind of worried that Jackson's Mill might just disappear altogether. When they heard that people in Morgantown, specifically with the Extension Service, were looking for a 4-H camp, they said, hey, we know a spot. You should come here to Jackson's Mill. And that, in kind of a short way, is a good way to describe kind of how it all happened. In 1920, William Kendrick, along with some of his closest colleagues, came down here to Jackson's Mill and took a tour of the place. They left convinced that this was the place that needed to be the 4-H camp. So the following summer, they brought together a group of people and they held the first 4-H camp in the nation down in our historic area at Jackson's Mill. Back then, the only thing that was really there was the old mill, a stone marker, and about 5 or so acres of rolling hills and grass. But this was perfect. They weren't looking for anything like we have today because early on, they just wanted to be able to hold camp. But after that first camp, the ideas began to develop rapidly. So within the next couple of years, they bought up multiple acres and began to lay out a plan for what Jackson's Mill would look like. Now there are some things that are in this plan that are here today and some things that aren't. Sometimes you can plan some really neat stuff, but it doesn't always mean that it works out that way. But this does show us that the first people who were planning out Jackson's Mill had a lot of great ideas for what this place could look like and how it could develop. One of the most important things that they needed to do was they needed to figure out places where people could actually stay, people could actually learn, and people could actually eat. Now in the first few years of Jackson's Mill, this was done in tents and mostly outside. But they knew that they wanted to make this place a permanent location. So that would mean permanent structures, or today, cottages or cabins. And these cottages are named after many of the counties here in West Virginia. And that's not by accident. First Director William Kendrick developed partnerships with many people in the counties across the state to make these buildings a reality. The way the partnerships generally worked, and each one was a little different, was that the county would either raise money, donate funds, or just donate people to help construct the buildings here on campus. And that is how many of these buildings came to be. Now originally, They decided that they were going to have one for each county. Well, as time went by, they realized they didn't quite need that many, but all of the ones that had been built here bore the name of the counties that helped contribute. So for now, let's head out into Jackson's Mill and take a look at some of these places and take a look at some of these buildings. And we'll also kind of see how things changed from the very beginning in the historic area to the large campus that we have today, which, by the way, is over 525 acres today. So behind me is a very large stone gate, and it sort of looks out of place in our historic area because it's just one of the only things that sort of doesn't fit. But it actually does fit, and it fits a very important thing. This was the original main entrance to Jackson's Mill, and in fact, for decades, hundreds of thousands of 4-H campers and visitors here to Jackson's Mill would have come right through these gates, and the first thing they would have seen next to them is the Jackson Mill right there. Now today, you have to come down to our historic area in order to see that. And you wouldn't even really pay attention much to this gate down here if you really weren't coming down here and taking a look at it. But this was the original main entrance to camp. So it is very important why we still have it here today. As we come from the area around Jackson's Mill here, you'll see that there's a row going down this road here of these various cottages that we talked about before. As I mentioned, that these cottages are in fact, in many cases, named after the counties that helped to fund and to get them constructed. The one that is closest over here is the Lewis Cottage, which was completed in 1922 for the obvious reason of being the local and closest community cabin, so that is the reason why it's down here. Remember, the original heart of camp was in our historic area, so Lewis Cottage was right next to it. So we're standing out here in the middle of this grassy open area, kind of referred to as the Camp Green or the main field here at Jackson's Mill. It's been a place where kids have run around and played games. Baseball diamonds have been set up here before. Soccer games have been played on here. This field has been home to a lot of different things, including the Mountaineers. In 1922, as a way to both find new ways to utilize this brand new space that the state had and the university had available to them, and also to get some attention as well, the team actually came down here and actually used this place to practice and even play some scrimmage games. In order to make this work though, they needed to be able to have a way to shower off after getting all sweaty and hot and things like that. So they actually helped by contributing some money, along with some local folks here in Weston and the university itself, to create a bathhouse, which was some of the first shower facilities that could then be used by not only the West Virginia University Mountaineer football team, but also everyone who camped and visited here at Jackson's Mill. Behind me is the Mount Vernon Dining Hall. If you're familiar with that, it's probably because that name is synonymous with George Washington, who lived at Mount Vernon. But that is located in Virginia, not here in West Virginia. So how is it that we call this place the Mount Vernon Dining Hall, and why do we do so? Well, a few years after camp was developed, the idea was to create a permanent dining hall. This was one of the central things that the initial plans and development of Jackson's Mill was focused on. So they were looking to create it, and they wanted to do it in a pretty central location. Well, from where we're standing right here, this is a pretty central spot on campus, and that's why the dining hall was selected as being there. What happened was, in those early years, as construction was beginning on the project, some young 4-H'ers accompanied the first director of Jackson's Mill, William Kendrick, to a conference in Virginia. During their trip, some of these young folks were able to take a trip over to Mount Vernon and got to see the interesting history there. The story goes that on the return trip, one of them happened to remark to Director Kendrick that it was really a shame that so few boys and girls here of West Virginia were ever going to be able to see something like that. Remember, this was almost 100 years ago, so travel was a lot different than it is today, and nobody had the internet. And so they decided to incorporate features of Mount Vernon into the design of the dining hall, and that is why we call this the Mount Vernon Dining Hall. Behind me is the Assembly Hall. This is one of the largest meeting spaces we have here at Jackson's Mill. This was another important early development for Jackson's Mill as a camp and as a facility to hold large events. Director Kendrick and also all of those planning camps wanted a place where people could come and gather, especially to get in out of the weather and to be able to hold things outside of the warmer summer seasons. The Assembly Hall was built and completed in 1923. Originally, it only went as wide as the opening is on the front porch there. As you can see, there are two sort of enclosed wings on either side. Those were added later. Interestingly enough, the reason for their addition is also a way to help us understand how Jackson's Mill survived a very difficult period, as the entire nation did, during World War II. During that period, from 1942 to 1943, our site was actually home to a training facility that trained naval air cadets, soldiers that were serving in the Navy, but that would be landing and taking off fighter planes on ships. In needing to have a larger classroom space, they were able to help with some money to expand the assembly hall, and that is one of the primary reasons why we were able to expand it. This was a very good benefit for Jackson's Mill, as this allowed our space to grow too, which is one of the neat things about being able to have the space that we have today. So a couple of these buildings behind me actually are some very interesting spaces. There are so many buildings here at Jackson's Mill, and each one of them has their own history. So we're only really getting a chance to share just a few stories and a few bits of information here. Again, like I said, there's so much to learn here at Jackson's Mill and so much to explore. But the two buildings behind me have been classrooms and meeting spaces for many, many years here at Jackson's Mill. Behind me over here is known as the Electric Energy Center, or EEC as most people know it today. But it was originally known as the Farm Home Electrification Building, and it was built in about 1940, and it was a partnership with some of the local power companies. Much like Flameway Hall was a partnership with the gas company, this was a partnership with the electric companies, and again, in a very similar type of way, this was a place that had places set up where they could do classes and demonstrations that would teach people the using of electricity and all of the information that they would need in order to be able to run their various appliances and things like that over the years. As with everything, things eventually evolved over the years. Still today, there's a couple of demonstration space, kitchen spaces inside of there, but most of those spaces are now classroom spaces and gathering spaces that can be used for all kinds of classes and all kinds of things that we can teach here at Jackson's Mill. On the other side over here is what is known as the Southeast Learning Center, or SLC. For many years, though, this was known as the Sewing Center, as there were a lot of sewing machines and classes that were held here, and this was a very, very popular place to have it. Now this, like EEC, was completed again around 1940. Eventually, it was added to and renovated and expanded in the 1960s. More recently, it had housed a computer lab so that we could actually have computer classes held here for young people. Today, our computer lab has actually evolved itself again, and so now that space is actually a meeting space, and we're using other types of technology like laptops and other types of things that we're able to use here now. So behind me, we have our brand new state-of-the-art STEAM building. STEAM standing for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics, is one of the newest buildings that has been completed here at Jackson's Mill, and also demonstrates some of the new and innovative sort of things that we're offering here in terms of classes and in terms of things that are going on here at Jackson's Mill. But just like everything else here at Jackson's Mill, that is the most recent development here at Jackson's Mill for our classes and for the things that we're teaching here. But over the years, this entire area and a number of these buildings around here have actually featured a variety of different things here. Behind me, before the steam building was in existence, a building named both Flameway and the Tower Building, it was the same building, just referred to two different ways, stood here. It was a partnership with one of the local gas companies that allowed a classroom space and a kitchen demonstration space cooking with natural gas. This was somewhat new early on in our history here at Jackson's Mill, and so it was a way to teach people how to be able to use and get comfortable with using natural gas for cooking and for other things like that. And so that building served for that purpose for many years. Eventually, in 2012, a large storm came through the area and a tree actually fell through the building. While it was sad to sort of see this building go, what it ultimately led to was the opportunity for us to construct this new building here on site. So even though sometimes things change here at Jackson's Mill, the mission and what we do here is always about teaching and learning, as they say in 4-H, how to make the best better. Behind me is one of the most iconic spots here at Jackson's Mill. Many 4-H campers would tell you that they believe this is the heart of Jackson's Mill. This is where the nightly campfire program, referred to as Council Circle, is held during 4-H camp. But this is not only a very special place for all the campers that come here today, but it was a very important spot to the very earliest campers. And the reason behind that was because when they started camp in 1921, they started campfire programs very early on. When they acquired a lot of that new property that we talked about, Director Kendrick and many others were looking for a spot, a permanent spot to have it. They were just holding it down near where the historic area is now, where a lot of the camping was happening. But with all this new land, they were looking around for a spot that would be the spot for the Council Circle and for the campfire program to happen day after day, year after year. And the story goes that two early campers to one of the very first camps were two young men, and they started walking through some woods, which was part of some of that new property that Jackson's Mill had just acquired. As they did, they came upon a spot where there was a natural bowl, and it seemed ideal. The sides sloped very gently towards a nice low point, a perfect spot to build a fire. There was only one problem. A huge tree sat right in the center of it. The boys went back and told Director Kendrick's right-hand person here, a man by the name of Uncle Charlie Hartley. And they told Uncle Charlie what they found. A perfect spot, but unfortunately there was this big tree there. Well, it seemed as though maybe it wasn't to be. But then, again as the story goes, that night, a huge storm passed through, and a bolt of lightning hit the tree, splitting it down to the root. The next day, when they went back out to show Uncle Charlie the spot, they found the tree in half. So eventually, they removed the tree, figuring this was a sign that this was where Council Circle had to be, and that's where it's been ever since. Over the years, tens of thousands of West Virginia 4-Hers have come here, and countless others of other types of groups and people have passed through this place. Again, this is one of the most iconic spots here at Jackson's Mill.
If you ever get the chance, I really suggest you go check out the gristmill at Jackson's Mill. It's quite the operation. But did you know that you can actually grind your own grain right at home without a big mill in your front yard? You absolutely can, and Joe is back to show us how.
Hello, my name is Joe Obidzinski, and I'm the program coordinator here at WVU Jackson's Mill. We're here in the Blaker Gristmill. This is a working 1790s water-powered gristmill here located at Jackson's Mill in our historic area. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about milling. And we're going to talk a little bit about the process, and we're going to talk a little bit about how this mill and other mills like it would work. And then we're going to talk about some variations of it and even show you some ways to do it at home. What I want to start with is talking about our mill specifically. Now, what is grist milling? Grist milling is grinding on a large scale. In this region, throughout our history, most of what people were milling was things like corn and wheat. Now, the way that a grist mill works is using giant stones like this to grind things up. Now, in order to use giant stones like this, we have to be able to move them. Well, that is where the mill comes into play, the rest of the building. This giant stone is about 3/4 of a ton, 1,500 pounds. Now, in order to move something of that size, we need large gears and a lot of water to be able to make that work. Now, all of that happens with our mill pond outside, and when the water comes into our mill, it starts to turn our water wheel, and some large gears and the floor beneath me start to move. And once they start to move, our stones start to turn. And that's how the process gets going. Now, in this case, we can see on our giant stone here that this stone has a pattern that's carved into it. This is called the cut or the dress of the stone. This allows the grind that we're going to do to be consistent all the way through. Now, as we can see, there is a giant stone here on top. What we probably can't see is that there is the one on the bottom, and the one on the bottom is a stone that doesn't move. That is called the bed stone. But this top stone is called the runner stone, and that's what would actually turn to provide motion for the grind. Remember I said, the stone starts turning, and that's how we're going to grind everything up. Now, in this case, we have this stone over here set up kind of as a display so that people can see how big the stones are, they can see the pattern that's in them, and these are not stones that we would actually use during our grind. Those are located next to me. But for today, what I want to talk about is this stone right here, and specifically what's right in front of us. And the reason for that is because what we can't see when we have our mill running is we can't see in between our stones. Well, if we were going to use those stones, we would have to have those stones really close together. And when I say really close together, I'm talking about closer than the space between my fingers. And as you can kind of tell, there's not much space there. That's because we're grinding up things like kernels of corn. And as we know, kernels of corn are quite small. It also would mean that this stone on top would actually be flipped over so that its pattern would be running against the one on the bottom while the corn was in between being ground up. Since we're not able to see through stone, I have this display for us so that we can see it. So as you can see the pattern on there, as the stone is turning, that is what it would look like if we could see in between the stone. Obviously we can't, which is why I'm using this. But as everything goes through the middle, it starts to get ground up as everything turns. Well, as it does, more and more continues to go through. Well, as more gets ground up, the stone continues to turn, everything gets worked to the outside, where it finally gets swept along before it drops down a chute where I collect it. Now, a grist mill like this could produce quite a lot of cornmeal and wheat flour or whatever they happen to be grinding up in a day. The amount would depend on how much water they had, how much they had to do, and then how long they wanted to work. In this case though, this mill can put out quite a lot of product in a short amount of time. So taking a step down from our large grist mill, there were smaller versions of it that existed throughout history. This right here is an example of a slightly smaller one. Well, quite a bit smaller actually. This is known as a quern, Q-U-E-R-N. It's a Latin term. But basically what it is it is a grist mill, but on a smaller scale. Now this grist mill, unlike ours, is not water powered, but rather driven by whoever's running it. In this case, me. Or if you were doing this, it'd be you. Now, in order to make this work, you have to use the large stone. Now, there are still two stones, the one here and one beneath here that we can't see. And what would happen is, if you were using this to grind corn or wheat or whatever you happen to do, you throw it down through the middle, and then you'd start the process of grinding. The process of grinding sort of worked like this. You'd find a little spot right here, and you'd start to move this all around. And as you did, you'd grind everything up that was in between. Now there was a way to adjust how fine or coarse you wanted things. There are actually little tabs underneath the table that could be knocked in to raise or lower stone in between, but ultimately the process was the same. But again, even something like this is a little large for our homes, so let's take a look at some examples of mills that you could use inside your home and things that you could do yourself if you wanted to try milling at home. So we're back here at our large stone, and in front of me now I have a small hand-cranked mill. And what we see here is we see, just like in the other examples, two stones. The one here on the bottom and the one here on the top. And as you might be able to tell, there's a pattern on this bottom, or on this top one, and on this bottom one as well. Now the setup is actually very simple, and the way that it works is very straightforward, just like all of the other stuff. And as we talked about before, all of the meal as it comes out, or all the corn as it gets ground up, goes to the outside, and then in this case, there's just a small hole here, which is where all of the stuff that you grind up will come out the bottom. Now I'm gonna set this up, and then we'll see how it works. Now that we have this set up, what we'll do now is we will grind something up. Now we don't have water in this case, but as we saw in our last example, you don't have to have water power when you can use the power of your own strength. So in this case, what we do is we just move this around, and we just keep turning it until we get a nice grind that we're interested in. As we go around, you can make your adjustments as it happens. And as it spins, more of that corn will go in between the stones, and more will continue to grind up as it happens. Now as we grind this around, because we don't have a large stone, if you need to grind it a little bit further, you can put it through again, adjust it a little finer, and then you can grind it a little bit more. This is all about preference, so you can grind this as fine or as coarse as you'd like. But you're doing the exact same process that we were using with the big stones here in the mill and in our last example with the corn. So if you don't have a home version of this and you'd like to do this yourself, they do have variations online of small little mills like this. Some of them even have small motors inside that'll do it for you, be a little bit easier. But again, there are definitely ways to do this at home. But there's even one more traditional way of actually grinding things up, and that actually predates grist mills themselves, which themselves go back a few thousand years. So let's take a look at that before we finish up here. We're going to talk about one of the oldest types of ways to grind. This in front of me is a mortar and pestle. This is made of granite, but you can find ones of various different kinds. But very simply, it is a stone bowl and a small rounded stone, and the idea is that much like our stones in the mill when they're spinning, we will take some of our corn, put it down in the bowl, and then we essentially just have to start working and grinding everything up. Now, as you can see, this is going to take quite a bit of work, and it's very obvious to anyone why, when people realized that they could do this by running large grist mills and large stones, how much quicker it would be, how much easier it would be, and how much less work it would be on them, they quickly gravitated to that. But again, if you have something like this in your home and you grind anything up, you are essentially doing what a grist mill does. You're just doing it on a smaller scale. Just know that you're a miller too, even if you don't have a big grist mill. Now, because mine's not running today, I got some more milling to do. So I'll see you all next time. Thanks for joining.
Did you guys have fun at WVU's Jackson's Mill? I've got great news for you. We're going to head right back down to the mill for some more fun later this week. And we'll see you right back here next time.